She showed up at a social ball in a simple beige dress, and no one understood who she was. Her silence made those who were used to speaking loudly and only about themselves think. One unexpected act turned the idea of generosity, status, and real power upside down. But the most powerful thing in this story is not what she did, but what she refused. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. It was a particularly cold evening in Boston, but that didn't stop the line of cars pulling up to the majestic Rosenhall building, a former late 19th century mansion that is now the site of the annual Aurora Hearts Charity Ball. Limousines, gleaming electric cars, and rare vintage cars lined up in the parking lot. Doormen opened the doors with practiced grace, and guests emerged as if from a catwalk, in sparkling gowns, silks, velvets, and furs, with faces trained to smile just right. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the sparkle of cameras, and conversations about philanthropy that no one was sincere about. This was a ball of the generous, but not the selfless. Every step had a subtext. Emma Langton stepped out of an old silver sedan without a driver. She closed the door herself, thanked the elderly valet, and sauntered toward the entrance. She wore a beige dress, modest, just above the ankle, with a closed collar and long sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her makeup was barely noticeable. Her presence seemed unglamorous, and that was precisely why it was immediately noticeable. Among the guests, whose radiance was almost aggressive, her quiet reserve stood out as something out of place, or as something too real. "Who is it?" whispered one of the women in the emerald dress, clinging to her companion. "I don't know. Probably one of the staff," he suggested casually. Emma walked past them without looking away. Her name was on the list at the entrance. The organizer was surprised, but did not show it, and immediately handed her a cloakroom number. The hall was crowded. The music was classical, but with a slight jazz tint. The orchestra played an overture. Waiters scurried between the tables, carrying champagne and canapes. The walls were decorated with portraits of the founders of the foundation, and in the center of the hall towered a sculpture of a child holding a lantern, a symbol of the light of hope. Emma took a seat at table number 18 in the back row near the column. It was convenient for her to observe from here, but almost no one noticed her, although it would seem this particular place was chosen with intent. She did not exchange phrases with anyone, did not take pictures near the photo zone, did not rush to make acquaintances. She simply sat, observed, sometimes answered the waiter's questions, and quietly smiled at the children running past. At this time, a conversation was already raging in the center of the room between several famous families. Among them was Catherine de Marie, known not so much for her generosity as for her ability to be in the camera's focus. Her bright red couture dress, diamond necklace, and styled hair attracted glances no less than her ability to conduct conversations in which the main thing is not the content, but the tone. Catherine raised her glass, and looking around the room, asked with a feigned smile, "Tell me, who let in a nun without a monastery?" Several heads turned. Laughter went around the circle. She nodded toward Emma and was joined by sly looks. "Looks like someone is celebrating modesty, or saving. Maybe this is a new performance to show how grant recipients live." They laughed the way people who think they are immune to awkwardness laugh. Emma felt their eyes on her. But she didn't flinch. She raised a glass of water, not even champagne, to her lips, and took a slow sip. Calmly, confidently, because she knew their evening was built on facade, and hers was built on meaning. At one point, an elderly woman in an elegant pantsuit approached her. Mrs. Eldridge, a veteran of charity, one of the few who had not lost their true taste for humanity in this world. "Excuse me, you're Emma, right?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Yes, Emma Langton. I don't remember you from previous events, although your face seems as if I should know it. You're probably just good at remembering people you can trust." Mrs. Eldridge laughed, a genuine hoarse laugh. You speak like a person who has nothing to prove. Don't you think that almost everyone here does the opposite? I think so. That's why I decided to sit next to you. They talked for a few more minutes, briefly but respectfully, and while the room continued to swirl with glitz and ego, the only real conversation took place at one table. Emma learned that Eldridge had been a nurse before she got into grant-making. And Eldridge learned that Emma had worked with foundations for more than a decade, preferring not to mention it in the press. As the orchestra slowed, and the evening's host walked up to the stage to announce the start of the formal part, Emma glanced at her watch. Her moment was approaching, but for now, she was just a shadow. A woman in a beige dress, whom no one had invited, but whom no one could fail to notice, even if it was too late. Because sometimes it is the quietest presences that become the loudest discoveries. As the orchestra moved from the overtures to a lighter jazz interpretation, the audience began to slowly disperse into zones, some at the bar, others closer to the terrace where tall heaters had been installed. The spotlight, as always, was on those who knew that the spotlight should be theirs. Catherine de Marie shone with a special grace. She seemed to dance between the groups, not allowing any to linger on her for too long, but not allowing herself to be forgotten for a minute. Her voice was soft but cold, like a silk glove on ice. This evening is especially important, she said, surrounded by familiar ladies. We, like no one else, understand that setting an example is charity. People need to see who really cares. We are the ones who are lifting this city up. We are not hiding. Her words were as precise as her facial expressions, and every gesture said, "Remember." But Emma stood a little to the side, against the wall, still alone. She didn't approach the treats, didn't laugh out loud, didn't drape herself with organization badges. She simply stood and watched, occasionally jotting notes on her phone. It was as if she were surveying the environment, like an ethnographer recording the habits of a rare species. "There she is again," Catherine whispered, catching Emma's eye. "I'm surprised she got through the selection." We agreed that the ball was for those who actually participate. "Maybe she's accompanying one of the staff?" another guest suggested. "Or did someone let her in out of pity?" "Pity isn't a ticket," Catherine said with a fake grin. "But that's okay. Her time here is up before midnight." Meanwhile, preparations were underway on stage for a small fundraising block. The host, one of the young representatives of the foundation, led the evening easily, but with a memorized intonation, alternating jokes with touching stories. Videos about children who had undergone treatment were followed by applause. The parents' faces evoked emotions in the audience, but in the right, measured dose, emotions were measured. Because the ball was not about suffering, but about spectacular charity. At least, that's how it was perceived by those who came not to give, but to shine. When the story about a little boy named Ezra, who had undergone 4 rounds of chemotherapy, appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. Even Catherine, who for a moment forgot about her role, froze. The video ended with a shot of Ezra holding a teddy bear and saying, "I want other children to be healthy and have their own teddy bear." The music faded, and in that silence the host said, "This evening is not only about help, it is about memory. About what we leave behind." I want to thank everyone who contributed, especially those who do it behind the scenes. Today, one of our guests anonymously donated $25 million to build a new pediatric wing. And although the donor's name is still a secret, we are preparing a special recognition, the first in the history of the foundation. The room was tense. Eyes sparkled, lips parted as everyone mentally considered the possibilities. Some were getting ready to applaud Catherine, others were exchanging questioning glances. Catherine straightened up as if she were getting ready to go on stage. Her husband Ronald gave her an affirmative nod. "Is it you?" whispered one of the ladies. Catherine smiled mysteriously. I prefer not to comment, but her eyes said something else. Yes, it was her. She could already imagine her name being carved into the marble of the children's ward, the TV cameras lining up to get a comment, the headlines in the magazines, "The woman who gave a chance." But for now, she had to wait. Calmly, slowly. At this point, Emma stood at the coffee table. She picked up a cup of warm tea, took a sip, and looked away from the stage. She knew what was coming. She knew the ball was coming to a head. But the main thing for her wasn't the microphones and flashes. She was looking at Ezra's photo, now framed on the screen, and she thought, "You're worth it. Not my name. Yours." Mrs. Eldridge appeared next to her again. "Aren't you bored here?" she asked. "No," Emma replied. "I'm just thinking how loud silence can be." "You have an amazing observation. I've just heard the loud ones too often, and the real ones too rarely." "Do you work with children?" Emma nodded. "With those whose names won't make it into the newspapers, but who deserve to have their lives long." Eldridge looked at her attentively. "You know, Miss Langton, if there were more people like you, maybe we'd stop building parties for pain and start building for hope." Emma didn't answer. She just smiled and turned her gaze back to the stage, where the audience was already preparing for the evening's climax. She knew that there would be a moment when her name would be called, but not because she wanted it, but because, having once allowed herself to remain in the shadows, she gave light to those who needed it more, and if the world decided to see her, let it see her. But she hadn't come for that, and she certainly hadn't come for the recognition of those who laugh first and bow later. The ball continued, but someone's triumph was already on the threshold of its destruction, or rebirth. The lights in the hall dimmed, and the orchestra, sensing the change in mood, froze mid-breath on the last note. The host came back on stage, holding a cream-colored envelope emblazoned with the Aurora Hearts logo. His face was serious, and his voice was extremely even, like a man who knows he is about to say something important. The audience fell silent, as if they sensed the approach of the moment many had been waiting for since the beginning of the evening. The center of attention was him and the envelope and the question, whose name would be called. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "every year we thank all the patrons whose generosity helps us move forward. But today, something special happened. Today we received the largest individual donation in the history of the foundation. It is $25 million. These funds will allow us to build a new pediatric center where children will undergo rehabilitation after cancer operations in the conditions they deserve, with care, peace, hope." We discussed for a long time what to do, whether to keep the donor's name a secret, as he initially asked, or to give him the gratitude that he certainly deserves. And here is the decision. Someone in the audience coughed. Someone pulled out a chair. Catherine de Marie adjusted her necklace, and her gaze confidently slid over the stage. Headlines were already running through her head. "Philanthropy with a face. She is the heart of Aurora Hearts." She even smiled slightly when the host tore open the envelope. Everything had to be perfect. The donation was made by Mrs. Emma Langton. A pause. Silence. No applause. Just silence. The kind that sounds louder than any ovation. People didn't understand, or not right away. The name didn't match expectations. Someone turned to their neighbor. Someone to the screen, where a photo was already appearing. A shot taken during the evening. A woman in a beige dress, modest, with a cup of tea, in the shadow of the hall. Catherine froze. Her lips parted. Her gaze darted to the stage, then to the back rows. Emma rose from her seat without haste, slowly, with dignity. She did not ostentatiously straighten her back. She always sat that way. She did not seek their gazes, but they were all fixed on her now. She walked toward the stage, and every step she took echoed in the chests of those who had snickered behind her back a few hours earlier. Those who had said, "The dress is not in the dress code." those who had laughed when she walked in alone, and now they were making way. Emma walked up the steps, took the microphone from the host's hands. The spotlight was blinding, but she looked straight into the audience. Her face was calm. There was no anger in her eyes, only determination. "I didn't plan to speak, but since the name has been spoken, let the words be spoken." She fell silent, as if listening to herself. Then she continued, "I don't seek recognition. I don't need a plaque with my name on it. I didn't come here for thanks, and I certainly didn't come here to be the subject of small talk. I'm here because I know what it's like to lose everything before you're 10. Because I've been in those hallways, next to that hospital bed where the child looks at the mother and asks, 'Will I get well?' And the mother doesn't know how to lie in a way that makes it sound convincing." Someone in the room looked down. Catherine froze, her lips trembling. Emma continued, "I gave this money not because I can, but because I have to. Because if you can change someone's fate but you don't do it, you lose the right to remain silent. I don't want my portrait to hang in the hallway. I don't want people to write about me. I want there to be only one inscription on the wall: for those who fight, for those who wait, for those who live." She handed the microphone back to the host. The room was deafeningly silent, and then someone clapped. One, then another, then the whole room. The applause was awkward, but honest, not out of politeness, out of respect. People stood up, forgetting about their glasses and dresses. Even Ms. Eldridge stood up, quietly whispering, "What a speech." Catherine sat. Her world was shaking. Her reality was wavering, not because she wasn't in the center, but because she was in the wrong place, and that hurt more, so much more. Emma returned to her table, but now she didn't have to hide in the shadows. The shadows were gone, and the light came, not spotlights, but meaning. For the first time that evening, the ball was real, and it wasn't the stage that was leading it, but the woman in beige, who simply came and remained herself. After her speech, the audience could not come to their senses for a long time. Those same people who were used to keeping a straight face under any circumstances now did not know how to behave properly. Smile? Apologize? Pretend that nothing had happened? The usual social masks suddenly became uncomfortable. They no longer concealed, they exposed. Some, especially experienced in social pretense, were already building scenarios in their heads to approach, apologize, call what had happened a misunderstanding, mention sincere admiration. But many had the tact to simply remain silent. The ball continued, according to schedule, according to protocol, but a strange pause was felt in the audience, not written into any scenario of the evening. Catherine de Marie remained seated without rising. Her dress was immaculate, her makeup unblemished, her posture proud, but inside she seemed to shrink. Her eyes kept sliding to the side where Emma sat at the table, the woman she had mocked so caustically earlier that afternoon, the woman she had considered out of her league, the woman who had not just changed the course of the evening, but seemed to have upended the entire routine to which Catherine had become so accustomed. One of her friends, Janine, always sensitive to the social climate, approached her. "Did you know?" she whispered, sitting down next to him. "No," Catherine answered quickly. "I thought she was just someone random." That's what we all thought. They fell silent. Words were superfluous. Even Janine, who always had a way of finding an excuse for even the most awkward situation, had no comment to make. Catherine felt more than just shame. It was something else, deeper. As if everything she had built her ideas of value on, of meaning, had suddenly crumbled under the weight of one simple act. The modesty she had considered a weakness suddenly turned out to be a strength, and her own confidence was feigned. Later in the foyer, as the ball was winding down and people were starting to gather, Catherine made up her mind, not because it was the proper etiquette, but because something inside her demanded it. Not a loud apology, not a restoration of her reputation, just honesty. She walked over to Emma, who was about to leave, helping an elderly guest put on her coat. "Emma," she said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Emma turned around. There was no coldness in her face, no triumph, only calm. "Certainly." Catherine clasped her hands as if seeking support from them. I behaved unworthily, and to be honest, this is probably not the first time. But today, I saw what real dignity looks like, and I am ashamed, seriously ashamed." Emma looked at her calmly, not a grimace, not a drop of condescension. "I bear no grudge, Catherine," she replied softly. "We were all once blind. It's just a question of whether we choose to see." Catherine swallowed. There was a lump in her throat. Her usual memorized phrases didn't work, and this simple one was almost revealing. "I would like to learn more about your project, about how you can really help, not with checks, with your hands." Emma nodded, as if she had expected exactly those words, but she was in no hurry to give hope. "You can always help. The only question is why. For yourself or for those who really need it." Catherine nodded, slowly, for the first time, not out of agreement, but out of understanding. "I want to start from an honest place, then come to the center, not for the reception. But on Tuesday morning, there we sort parcels for families from the regions. Simple work, lots of dust, and no photography. Will." They said goodbye briefly, no hugs, no publicity. Catherine walked away, but her gait no longer had the confidence with which she had entered this room. It was as if she had shed the weight she had carried for years, the weight of status, of a mask, of pretense. Emma stepped out into the cold air. There was a light snow outside. She raised her face to the sky, and the first snowflake melted on her cheek. She felt no victory, only peace. This evening was not about revelation. It was about discovery, sometimes including of oneself. Eldridge caught up with her from behind, holding the scarf Emma had forgotten. "I knew there was something in you, but I didn't think it was that strong." "I'm not stronger than others," Emma replied. "I've just learned to be myself, even if it's inconvenient for others." "That's the power, my dear, not your loudness, but your silence." They hugged, for real, without cameras, and they walked down the street, dissolving into the night where there was no spotlight. Only the crunch of snow underfoot, and purity, that which does not scream, but remains. The morning was quiet, with a light drift of snow, as if winter itself was in no hurry to come into its own. Snowflakes were slowly circling outside the windows of the Svetokryl Center, the new building of the children's department, built with funds from Emma's donation and landing on the branches of the fir trees. The building, constructed of light glass and wood, did not look like a hospital block, but like a place where not only the body, but also hope begins to recover. There were no marble slabs with the names of sponsors at the entrance. Only one frosted glass plaque with an engraved inscription: "Dedicated to those whose names we may never know, but whose hearts fight every day." Emma walked in without warning about her visit. She did this often, not according to protocol, not for photo reports, but just to be there. Today she brought several boxes of books and board games for the play area. The administrator met her in the hall, smiled, nodded. He knew that of all the visitors, Emma was the only one who came without security, PR support, and pre-compiled lists. She walked along the corridors of the center, greeting the doctors, looking into the wards where children played, drew sometimes, just looked out the window. Many did not recognize her, and that was wonderful. She did not want them to remember her face. She wanted them to remember her care. In the art therapy room, Catherine was kneeling by a large box, sorting stuffed animals. She was wearing a simple beige turtleneck, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and her nails were cut short. A girl of about 6 was sitting next to her, sorting through dolls, occasionally glancing at the woman she had become friends with. Catherine looked up and saw Emma. "Good morning," she said, straightening up. "Good," Emma replied. "Have you settled in yet?" "I try. Sometimes it feels like this is another planet. No flashes, no envy, just real." "That's why she heals," Emma said softly, sitting down next to him. "You don't have to be someone here. Just be." They were silent. The girl continued to play, and snow fell behind the glass wall. Catherine exhaled. "They called me yesterday from a magazine. They want to interview me about the new path." I refused. Emma looked at her with a slight smile. "So it really is new. I want to stay in the shadows, like you, although it's harder than it seems. Sometimes shadow is not shelter. It's a choice." Later, they went into the storage room together, helping to arrange boxes of medicine. In one of them was an old toy, a teddy bear in a blue sweater. Catherine froze. "This is the same bear from the video." Ezra was holding him. "Yes," Emma nodded. "We kept the series. His story became the beginning of the foundation." "Did he survive?" "Yes. Now he is in the 3rd grade. Recently, he sent me a postcard with the inscription, 'Thank you for my ball and the fact that I can now run.'" Catherine smiled. A real smile, without the practiced social mimicry. "And all this is thanks to you. No, thanks to us. Thanks to everyone who at some point decided to stop being a spectator." On their way out of the center, they stopped at a window overlooking a children's playground. There was snow there now, but swings, garden paths, and flower beds would appear in the spring. The first seedlings had already been ordered. "There's going to be an apple orchard here," Emma said. "I want the kids to see something growing. Not just them, but around them." "Have you chosen the seedlings yet?" "Yes, but there are no gardeners." Catherine looked at her and understood. "Sign me up first." When Emma stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The air was crisp, the sky almost clear. She walked down the path alone, without an entourage, but not lonely. There was a silence in her heart, the silence that comes after a storm. And inside her lived a certainty. It doesn't matter whether your name is known. What matters is what you leave behind. And if this world has become even a little warmer, then it was all worth it.